Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Budget Magic. So this week we are heading to Modern for the first time in a while to play an awesome deck. This is all in Shaman. This deck is looking to flood the board with creatures as quickly as possible and then kill the opponent really fast before they get a chance to recover. As you can see, $84 in the paper world, 26 ticks on Magic Online, so incredibly cheap, especially for the modern format. A quick reminder before we break it all down. If you enjoy this deck, and you enjoy Budget Magic as a whole, it would be amazing of you if you could take a minute, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. All that stuff is a great way that you can support the channel and the site for free. Anyway, let's talk about All In Shaman. So, the card that makes Shaman work is Rage Forger. Rage Forger is a Shaman Lord, and it is a super powerful Shaman Lord. So, here's what Rage Forger does. It's a 3-mana 2/2, unexciting, elemental shaman. Every single creature in the deck is a shaman. When it enters the battlefield, each shaman you control gets a +1/+1 counter, and then it kind of turns into a Hell Rider, if you remember that card from Standard. Whenever a creature with a +1/+1 counter attacks, that creature can deal a damage to target player. So if we get a bunch of shamans, play a Rage Forger or 2 Rage Forgers, we not only pump up all of our shamans, make them big, but we also get in this free damage. So we don't even really have to be able to connect with our attacks to win. We just need to attack and get all these Rage Forger triggers to kill our opponent. So Rage Forger is the reason to play this deck. Without Rage Forger, this deck wouldn't work. It is everything. It is actually so important to the deck that we are playing a bunch of ways to find our Rage Forgers. So most importantly, Flamekin Harbinger, 1/1 for 1 that tutors an elemental from your library, puts it on top of your deck, so you're going to draw it your next turn. So on turn 1 or turn 2, we can play a Flamekin Harbinger. Almost exclusively, basically 100% of the time, we are tutoring for a Rage Forger to make sure we have it on turn 3 to start closing out the game. We can, if for some reason the game goes really long, use Flamekin Harbinger to tutor for a Flamekin Harbinger, to tutor for a Flamekin Harbinger, and then tutor for the Rage Forger, which gives us a bunch more Shaman on the battlefield. But I don't think I've ever cast a Flamekin Harbinger and not search for Rage Forger. That's just what it does. And we also have a single Fauna Shaman, also a Shaman, of course. But you can play a green, tap it, discard a card, search or discard a creature card, and you get to search for a creature card and put it into your hand. So this is another way that we can search out a Rage Forger. It's kind of expensive. That's the main reason there's one of them. It's also pretty slow. We have to play it, and it has to live, and we have to untap with it, and we have to have a creature in hand, and we have to discard it. Still a good way to find our Rage Forger. Atarka's Command is basically backup Rage Forger. Not as powerful, but for only 2 mana, you'll see this deck is about flooding the board with Shaman as quickly as possible. So for only 2 mana, we get to pump up our team and deal damage to our opponent. So it's a backup way to close out the game. Also works well with Rage Forger once we get it on the battlefield. It just makes our turn 4s super explosive. And we want basically as many Rage Forgers and Atarka's Commands as possible, because the rest of our deck is built around exploding as many creatures onto the battlefield on turn 2 as possible. So the easiest one is Burning Tree Emissary. A 2/2 for 2 when it enters a battlefield, you add 2 mana. So if you have a Burning Tree Emissary in your hand, you get to play it, then essentially we can play any other 2-drop in our deck for free using the mana off Burning Tree Emissary. We can also play any number of Burning Tree Emissaries. So if we have 3 of them in our hand, we just Burning Tree Emissary, Burning Tree Emissary, Burning Tree Emissary. The next turn, Rage Forger put a counter on all our Burning Tree Emissaries, making them 3/3s, which means 9 power and toughness just from Burning Trees, and then 3 additional damage from the Rage Forger when they attack, so it just gets really crazy. Bosk Banneret makes Treefolk and Shamans cost 1 less to play, so this allows us to be even more explosive. Sometimes we Rage Forger for 1 mana, or one of the sweet tricks with a new card, which is a Shaman. A really sweet addition to the deck is Beastcaller Savant. So if we have a Bosk Banneret on the battlefield, Beastcaller Savant essentially turns into Burning Tree Emissary. Because it has haste and taps to add a mana for creatures, we can Beastcaller Savant for 1 mana, then we can tap it immediately to add a mana to cast another Beastcaller Savant for 1 mana. So basically, the idea of this whole package is to play as many things on turn 1 and turn 2 as possible. Hopefully a 1-drop on turn 1, hopefully multiple 2-drops on turn 2, so then on turn 3, we're putting counters on 2, 3, 4 creatures with our Rage Forger and closing out the game. The rest of the creature base is just kind of some random Shaman. So we need another 1-drop to make sure we have a 1-drop. The Shaman 1-drop, not very great, but it's Fire Drinker Satyr. Technically a Shaman, that's the only reason it's in the deck. It has 2 power, which is good, but it's super painful. If it ever gets dealt damage, it deals that much damage to us, so it's pretty bad at blocking, pretty bad if someone bolts it, that basically turns a lightning bolt into a searing blaze. It can pump itself up, which is sometimes relevant if the game goes really long, but the game, if it's going really long, we're probably not doing well anyway. Elvish Visionary, it's a 2-2. We can play it for cheap off Bosk Banneret. We can play it off Burning Tree Emissary mana, and it replaces itself. So even though it's not adding mana and helping us explode on the battlefield on turn 2 that way, it does make sure our hand stays full and we keep drawing more Shaman to maximize the power of our Rage Forgers and Atarka's commands. And then, last but not least, a 3-drop in Burning Tree Shaman. Just big for its mana cost, as far as Shaman go at least, is a 3/4 for 3. And sometimes it deals some random damage when people activate abilities. We don't really have many abilities that we activate, other than, I guess, Fire Drinker Satyr. If we pump it up, it would deal a damage to us. But sometimes we get some free damage from people doing random things. So that is a creature base. The last card in the main deck, 4 lightning bolts, a little bit more reach. So we have, if we can get in a bunch of damage, not only do we have Rage Forger triggers, but we have a Atarka's Command and Lightning Bolt to get in damage, plus Bolt is a removal spell to get blockers out of the way so we can get in big attacks. Mana base, pretty simple. We got 8 duels. Temple of Abandon is pretty bad. I really wish it was an untapped duel. Our deck is all about untap land turn 1, untap land turn 2, although we got to make sure we have red on turn 1 into green on turn 2 to make that work. So it's a bad duel in the deck because our deck is aggressive, but it's a cheap duel, and I just couldn't find the budget to play another untapped duel. But Rootbound Crag is pretty good because we can play any basic on turn 1, and then Rootbound Crag is adding the mana on turn 2, and then just a bunch of basics. As far as the sideboard, guess what? More Shaman. So we have an interesting group of Shaman that do specific things. Reclamation Sage deals with artifacts and enchantments, and it's a Shaman. Goblin Rune Blaster takes care of Tron and creature lands. It's basically a Stone Rain on a body. Costs a little bit more mana, but it's also a Shaman that has haste. Loaming Shaman is our super secret tech to beat Dredge, which is incredibly popular in Modern at the moment. When we cast it, we make our opponent shuffle any number of cards that we choose from their graveyard into their library. So normally we just make them shuffle everything, but it gets rid of all their work with dredging, gets rid of their prized amalgams, their dredge cards. So good in that matchup. And then an Essence Warden, also a Shaman, comes in aggro matchups over Fire Drinker Satyr, which causes us to lose a lot of life. Instead, we get a 1-drop. It doesn't have the second point of toughness, but it lets us gain some life, which is nice. And then a bit more removal for specific situations. Dismember is just for whatever we need. There's no real specific purpose. Sudden Shock is to help kill infect creatures and other pump spelled creatures because our opponent can't respond with a Vines of the Vastwood or something, thanks to the split-second ability. And Gut Shot gets rid of something for free, like an Inkmoth Nexus, perhaps, or a lot of affinity creatures, and so forth. So that is all in Shaman for Modern, and I think this deck is really sweet. The all-in part of the name comes from the fact that it does have a problem. And like most decks whose goal is to dump as many things from their hand as possible on the battlefield on turn 1 and turn 2, we can't have trouble with Anger of the Gods, with Pyroclasm, with cards like that that can swipe away our entire board and then just kind of leave us with nothing, we don't really have a way to refuel. There's no real card advantage that's going to help get us back in the game. I guess we can chain together Elvish Visionaries, but that's the all-in aspect. We just jam our hand on the battlefield, get as many Rage Forgers and Atarka's commands, and hope we win. But it seems pretty decent. It's aggressive, it's cheap, it's very explosive, so we pretty much put our opponent to the test that says, do you have an Anger or a Pyroclasm, something along those lines. If not, we're likely just going to beat you down before you get a chance to do anything relevant. And those cards aren't super popular. They do see play, but it's not like every deck is running Anger and Pyroclasm. So there's some decks where we just line up incredibly well. And it's really nice that we have so much reach thanks to Rage Forger, Lightning Bolt, and Tarkus command. So if we can get in just one Rage Forger attack with a bunch of creatures on the battlefield, likely that's enough damage that over the course of a couple turns, even if our opponent has a Supreme Verdict or something, a way to deal with our board, we're going to be able to win with Lightning Bolts and Atarka's commands and our reach spells. So anyway, that's all in Shaman. Like I said, this deck is really sweet. I had a lot of fun playing it. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the gameplay videos, and I will talk to you soon.